the interim protection order was granted the next day, and a court date was set for the end of June. I immediately headed to the police station to get them to serve the protection order, confident in my belief that my struggles were finally at an end. Silly me. When I handed over the form and the officer saw that written next to address was the word unknown, he refused to accept it, saying that he needed a fixed address. I responded that I didn't have one, that I had photos of where my attacker was camping out. I pointed out on the picture the distinctive graffiti on a nearby wall that could be used in pinpointing his location with, a little f***ing police work, but still they refused. For the second time in a week, I was told that I needed to go find my attacker myself and then call them. Same same police station, different day.
Can the accused please stand? The South African government has decided to act decisively to stem the growing tide of conscientious objectors. It is my duty as a magistrate to protect our beloved republic from young men such as yourself who hold the system in such contempt. I therefore find you guilty as charged. I sentence you to 90 days in military custody. You'll be escorted to the holding cells below.
In 1971, Thomas Budge, a young gay Jehovah's Witness, refused to serve in the apartheid military. He was sent to the military detention barracks in the then Hourquebie.
Welcome to your new home for the next 3 months.
He was marked as a troublemaker, and they wanted to make an example out of him.
Private Budge. The sergeant accuses you of refusing to wear your uniform. And here you're standing kaal gat in front of me. What do you have to say for yourself?
Captain, I stand here stripped naked in front of you because I'm not an enlisted member of the South African Defence Force. Neither Sergeant Vermaak, the corporal, you, nor any other officer has jurisdiction over me.
Is that so? Very well then. I find you guilty of insubordination and willful disobedience.
How long will they keep him in detention? And how will his parents and church react when they find out that he is gay? Based on a true story, Stripped is South Africa's first feature-length audio drama podcast, releasing October 2024 on the website startlivingmy.life and wherever podcasts are available.
Keep right on to the end of the road. Keep right on to the end.
A Crime Most Queer is an LGBTQ true crime podcast intended for adult audiences and may contain graphic or disturbing content, including detailed descriptions of violence, physical or sexual assault, injuries to victims, and foul language. If you feel this may trigger you at all, please reconsider listening.
My name is Hourquebie. I am the host of the LGBTQ true crime podcast, A Crime Most Queer. Okay, so in September 2022, I met a transgender teen, although at the time she wasn't yet ready to acknowledge that she was trans. She came from a shockingly abusive home. I'm not going to go into detail, but long story short, at 2 a.m, a couple of months after we met, this barely 17-year-old kid rocked up at my door, clearly distressed, and I took her in. In that moment, I swore to myself that I would always protect her. However, I was sharing a flat with my mom at the time, and this kid didn't really have her own space. So I contacted a friend of mine who I've known for more than half my life, and I arranged for the kid to go and stay with him and his boyfriend, where she would have her own room. The plan was, ultimately, that I would move into my own place, and then the kid could move back under my roof once I was settled. Best laid plans and all that. Unbeknownst to me, the boyfriend, who I'd known for a while, had become unhinged between when I last saw him in July 2018 and when this arrangement was made in February 2023. It soon became clear that I had moved an already traumatized kid who I saved from one fucked up home, and who by this time was calling me dad, into another fucked up home. Over the next few months, the verbal abuse that my kid endured escalated. But every time I asked if I needed to deal with it, I got, "No, Dad, it's okay. It's just for a short while. I can handle it." And every time, my heart broke a little more. When, in early May, the boyfriend physically assaulted my friend and my friend took my kid and fled to his sister, I decided it was time to intervene. My friend headed back home on Monday the 8th of May, and the following day I went through to Pretoria to fetch my kid from his sister's place. We then made our way back to Randburg. When we arrived at my friend's flat, I was met with an apartment in absolute chaos. It was filthy. It was cluttered. The room I had been told my kid would be using, this one that I'm in now, was filled with junk, and she'd been sleeping on a camping cot in the lounge. The multiple fish tanks made the place stink to high heaven, and it was a holiday resort for cockroaches. I was horrified. I was too shit scared to even eat in the place because I couldn't be certain that I would survive the experience. The next morning, my friend left for work, and the boyfriend also went out to wherever he went out to. So it was just me and my kid in the flat, and we decided to try and bring some order to the place. We emptied out the second bedroom, swept and mopped the floor, and set up the bed. At which time the boyfriend returned, and the snide comments began. I know this will come as a complete shock to anyone who knows me, but I'm not renowned for my quiet, retiring nature. And so when the boyfriend would throw a shitty comment at me, I would respond with my usual sarcastic wit. The trading of barbs escalated into a full-on shouting altercation. But the whole time I made sure to keep myself between him and my kid. I knew that I could take a punch, and I was pretty sure that my kid could take a punch as well. It's not like she hasn't taken more than her fair share in her past life. But what I didn't know was whether my kid would show sufficient restraint, should the boyfriend take a swing at her, to not beat him to death in his own home. Just because she's a girl doesn't mean she won't fuck you up. During the course of the day, I kept my friend abreast of what was happening at home, until at 5:06 I got a WhatsApp message from him letting me know that he was coming home, and I responded with an update of where things stood. No chaos as yet, bar loud noises. He is trying to get the cops here to take me away. I will need you here to indicate who needs to be taken away. I followed up a minute later with, "It doesn't seem like the cops are overly eager to send a vehicle." A minute after that, "No physical altercation, but the verbal altercation is on 10111's call recording server." Little did I know that all hell was about to break loose. At around 5:15, the boyfriend and I were still going at it. He was standing in the open plan kitchen and had put the kettle on to boil, but for what reason I didn't know. He was well aware that there was neither coffee nor sugar in the place. He'd already bitched about it being finished, and I had asked my friend to pick up some on his way home. Meanwhile, I was standing in the doorway, which is just over there, which leads into the kitchen and lounge, and my kid was in this room, busy over at the desk there, staying out of the argument as I'd asked her to do, and also safely out of the boyfriend's reach. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, the boyfriend yells at me, "Get out of my face!" I responded, "But I'm not in your face. There's at least a meter between us." And those are the last words I ever spoke to him. I guess because I was out of arm's reach and he knew he couldn't hit me or grab something and lunge at me, he grabbed the closest thing that could cover the distance faster than I could react. Before I knew what was happening, the contents of the freshly boiled kettle hit me square in the chest. I immediately retreated to this room and removed my shirt. My kid freaked the fuck out and obviously lost her shit. But I was in shock and I could barely catch my breath. All I could think to do was message my friend and say that I needed him now. "Bring security up with you." He just threw a kettle worth of hot water at me. His response? "Bloody hell." Which, to be honest, is kind of what I felt I had just walked through. I didn't understand how badly I was burnt, but I knew that it wasn't good. I could barely hold my phone because my hands were stinging. My torso was on fire from my chest to my waistband, and my sweatpants were drenched to my knees. I would later learn that I had been scalded from my right armpit to my navel and both wrists and hands. But somehow, thankfully, the material of my sweatpants had saved me from burns to my crotch area and thighs. I sent a photo to my friend, who texted me back to say that he was still in traffic and asked me if I could get my kid to call security. Which was when I realized that she was in the kitchen about to paint the walls with the boyfriend's blood. I called out to her and told her to go and fetch building security. She didn't want to leave me alone with him, but I knew that I needed to get her out of the flat. Also, I was pretty sure that I was safe in that moment, because if nothing else, the boyfriend is spineless, and he knew he'd done fucked up. My kid must have booked it down to the security station, and they must have hauled ass back because they arrived in less than a minute, which must have hammered home for the boyfriend that shit was about to get real. True to his spineless chicken shit nature, he turned on the waterworks. First claiming that I had burnt myself, and then that it was an accident, he was making coffee and the kettle slipped. If you recall, there was none in the flat. And again, he fucking knew it, because he had bitched about it. And besides, my burns made it quite clear that I was hit with water hurled through the air with force. I stepped out of the bedroom, and I ignored the boyfriend flatly, and told the guard to get him gone. I then turned and came back in here. At this point, my friend walked through the door, and then it was his turn to lose his shit at the boyfriend, finally telling the guard, as I had before, to escort him off the premises. That evening, my friend took me to the cop shop where I was told to go to the emergency room for treatment and to request a J88, which is the medical examination required in assault GBH cases, which I did. And then the next day, Wednesday, I went back to the police station with my friend and my kid and laid a charge of assault. At some point in the whole thing, I was handed a form which I was told if I ever saw my attacker, I needed to call the cops and hand the form to the police officer that arrived. They would inform the officer of the warrant for my attacker's arrest, and they would take the person that I identified into custody. By the time we were done giving our statements, I was physically and emotionally drained. I was also in considerable pain, so I went home resolving to go to the courthouse the following day, and there I'll get a protection order. I had no idea what shit I had unleashed on myself now that my attacker was homeless and had nothing to lose, and I hoped that a protection order would give me some peace of mind and scare him a little. This process, however, proved way more fucking difficult than it ought to have been. The next morning, Thursday, I arrived at the courthouse and was given the form to fill out. When I handed it back, I was told that my application would only go before a magistrate the following day. I was also informed that what I was applying for was an interim protection order, and I would not need to appear before the magistrate, but if it was granted, both my attacker and I would need to appear in court on the date indicated, when the magistrate would then hear both sides and decide whether the protection order needed to be made permanent, which actually means it's in place for 5 years. The clerk then told me to come back the following day after lunch. Fine. So, again, I come home and return to the courthouse the next day, now Friday, 3 days after my attack. And when I get there, I'm told that my application has been denied. The magistrate, without actually seeing me, if you recall, clearly decided that my need wasn't great enough and said no. I just broke down, right there in the clerk's office. And he said that I could see the chief magistrate and that he may be willing to grant a protection order. I tried that. I was left waiting in the main hallway of the magistrate's court for 4 hours, by which point I was fucking done. I was exhausted. The painkillers had long since worn off. I hadn't thought to bring any more with me because I had thought this was just going to be a 30-minute round trip. And I was equal parts of angry, frustrated, and distraught. And when the chief magistrate eventually called me in, to say that he was less than sympathetic would be an understatement of epic proportions. When he refused to reverse the decision of a lower magistrate, all I could think to do was lift his shirt to reveal my injuries and hope it would change his mind. And I asked him, do I have to be dead before somebody acknowledges that this man could pose a very real danger to me and my kid? I was dismissed with a wave of his hand. No goodbye, no fuck off, no get the fuck out of my office, just a wave. I felt lost and hopeless. As the days passed, I became increasingly fearful to leave the flat. I didn't know if stepping foot out of the complex was, in effect, taking my life into my own hands. What I did know was that the now ex-boyfriend was living rough down by the river that runs through our neighborhood. He had sent photos to my friend, I assume, in a ploy to garner sympathy. And I also knew that he was way past unhinged and squarely in not of sound mind territory. A sane person doesn't throw boiling water at someone they call a friend. But most crucially, I knew that the cops were not interested in looking for him. Remember when I said I was given a form in case I ever saw my attacker? Yeah, well, what they actually meant was, you go find him and then call us. It was clearly too much like hard work for the cops to do their fucking job and look for a fucking homeless person in a relatively small search area. I went through the next few days in a bit of a haze, but eventually I decided to try the protection order thing again, in the hopes that I would land before a different magistrate. But this time, I would bring receipts. Affidavits from me, my kid, and my friend of what transpired that day and the days, weeks, and months that preceded my attack. Photos of my injuries, screenshots of the WhatsApp chats providing a breakdown of the hours leading up to the incident and the minutes immediately following. Recordings made by my kid on the sly in the months that we were apart of the boyfriend verbally abusing my friend and my kid, of the boyfriend accusing me behind my back of being a pedophile for taking my kid in, and the boyfriend accusing my friend, his partner of 10 years, to his face of being a pedophile because he agreed to let my kid live with him, completely ignoring the fact that the decision to let my kid stay with him had been mutually agreed upon by both of them. My friend had insisted on that. The boyfriend had to be included in the discussion, and I had gotten the okay, not from my friend, but from the boyfriend himself. I'm not going to air any of the voice recordings because I'm keeping the identities of other parties in this story intentionally vague. But I fucking included everything in my application. And on Wednesday, May the 17th, I was back at the courthouse. But when I tried to resubmit the protection order application, this time with supporting evidence, the clerk didn't want to accept it, telling me that I can't reapply with the same evidence. So again, I lifted my shirt and said, here is my evidence. And it's all on the flash drive in that envelope attached to it. Maybe I too was insane in the moment, doing more or less the same thing and expecting a different result. But for once, insanity seemed to pay off. He looked down at my chest, looked back at my face, and held out his hand, not saying a word. For the second time in this man's office, I started to cry. He told me that it would be okay and that I needed to come back in the morning. The interim protection order was granted the next day, and a court date was set for the end of June. I immediately headed to the police station to get them to serve the protection order, confident in my belief that my struggles were finally at an end. Silly me. When I handed over the form and the officer saw that written next to address was the word unknown, he refused to accept it, saying that he needed a fixed address. I responded that I didn't have one, that I had photos of where my attacker was camping out. I pointed out on the picture the distinctive graffiti on a nearby wall that could be used in pinpointing his location with, a little fucking police work, but still they refused. For the second time in a week, I was told that I needed to go find my attacker myself and then call them. Same shit, same police station, different fucking day. I went home with a protection order in hand and nobody willing to serve it. The next day, Friday, May the 19th, my kid needed something from the shop a block away, and I decided to walk with her. I felt that it would do me good to leave the complex and remind myself that the world isn't the scary place that my trauma was trying to convince me that it is. Again, best laid plans and all that. As we made our way along the road connecting our street with the shop street, who should step out from behind a shrub but none other than the ex-boyfriend, my attacker. And he decided that he needed to confront me. Apparently, a week on the streets had given him a backbone. But a week in my head had taken one away from me. I panicked. But I tried not to show it. I immediately turned around and called to my kid to come back with me. We went back in the direction from where we just come. It is not hyperbole when I say that it took every last granule of self-control not to break into a full fucking sprint. I told my kid to run back to the flat and get that form the cops had given me while I waited on the corner, and I called the investigating officer. And to his credit, despite how underwhelmed I'd been with him up until that point, he arrived in person within minutes, and he brought 4 other detectives as backup. I'm not sure if they expected my attacker to be the size of a house or to put up a fight, but any backbone he had when he decided to get in my face totally abandoned him when 5 cops climbed out of a VW Polo and asked me to identify him. I did, and he was taken into custody. Finally, they had a fixed address for him, and the protection order was served on him in the holding cells later that day. He would ultimately be granted bail of 1,500 rand, but as he didn't have it and my friend refused to cough up, he was remanded to Sun City Prison south of Johannesburg, where he sat. 5 months, 7 court appearances, and a full head of hair later, he would be released. But we'll get to that part. Despite my attacker being in custody, coming face to face with him on the street the very first time I decided to deal with this PTSD bullshit on my own messed me the fuck up. And I had to admit to myself that I was not okay. I was beating myself up constantly. I was blaming myself for sending my kid into that environment. I was blaming myself for putting my kid in danger by engaging with a boyfriend and allowing the situation to escalate. I was blaming myself for not keeping the promise I had made to myself when she pitched up at my door at 2 a.m. There was a lot of guilt. There was a lot of pain, both physically and emotionally. And I was trying to be strong, but I was covered in burns, and every time I got undressed, I had to face what was done to me. There were so many times where I would go and shower, not because I was dirty, but purely because, with the water running, nobody could hear me cry. I knew I needed help. So I went online and searched Trauma Counsellors Johannesburg. One of the top results was a registered trauma counsellor operating under the name Jozi Counselling. And she did online consultations, which was fucking epic because I seriously did not want to leave the apartment ever again. Even though she and I were only 3 kilometers apart. We met via Skype on May the 24th, 2 weeks after my incident, and I poured my heart into her ear. I spoke about how I felt like I'd failed my kid, how I'd brought this on myself, how I'd put my kid in harm's way, how this could have gone so much worse than it did. All because I didn't back down. Could have been my kid in the firing line. She said that none of this was my fault, that what I was feeling was normal, and she suggested ways I could learn to cope with what I'd gone through. I remember thinking the entire time, yeah, right, lady, like that's gonna fucking work. But 16 months later, I can say with absolute certainty that it did fucking work. It made me stronger. And not just with what happened to me, but also how I face daily life. It still affects me thinking about it, but it helped me in one more way, probably the most important way. Speaking to the trauma counsellor helped me face my attacker. In November last year, the seemingly endless loop of court appearances and postponements finally came to an end, and I assumed that we were going to start preparing for trial. And that's when the prosecutor asked me if I'd be open to withdrawing the charges. I was shook. And honestly, seriously fucking torn. On the one hand, I didn't want to ruin his life. I honestly felt sorry for the dude. But on the other, I was fucked if I was going to let him get this little prick walk away scot-free. I wanted justice. But at the same time, I didn't feel that incarceration was in the best interest of his mental health. I'd seen with my own eyes over the course of his many court appearances how his physical appearance and demeanour had deteriorated, how much weight he'd lost, how his skin had started looking waxy from poor hygiene, how he had had to shave his head to get rid of the lice he picked up while in jail. And above all, he looked broken. When at one of his last court appearances, where his legal aid attorney asked that his bail be waived for health reasons, and I didn't oppose it, I saw true relief on his face, but no joy. And I realized pushing to keep going, we could end up going back to prison, wasn't justice. It was cruelty. So I thought about it for a few days. I went back to the prosecutor and I agreed to withdraw the charges, but with conditions. First, he needed to stay away from me and my kid. The full protection order had been granted on June the 20th and is in effect until June 2028. If he darkened my door again, I wouldn't think twice about making the call and having him carted away. Second, he needed to get himself some mental health treatment, and he needed to seriously needed to get his shit medicated. And lastly, he had to enroll in a diversion program to address his anger issues. The prosecutor had suggested this and said that there is a NICRO program specifically dealing with shit like this. When he agreed to all of this, the magistrate let him know that if he does all of this, the charges will be dropped and his ordeal would be over. Apparently, he completed the program earlier this year, and last I heard, he put 1,000 kilometers between us. So, that's a win. Personally, I'm strongly of the opinion that it was the trauma counselling that allowed me to look past my own feelings of anger and betrayal by a person who, once upon a time, claimed to be my friend. So, even though it was only one session, because that's all my finances allowed at the time, it got the healing started. And I was able to find peace.
Did it help you forgive?
Yeah, definitely. I've forgiven him. Yeah.
And forget?
Forget? No. No, not so much. Every time I take my shirt off and I face a mirror, or I look down at my chest, I still see the scars, especially after I climb out the shower when the hot water makes them more pronounced. They're a constant reminder of what happened to me. I will never forget. But I have forgiven. It may sound stupid or cliche, but forgiveness brings inner peace. And I found that through therapy. Forgetting, that's a whole other story entirely. But who knows? Maybe with more therapy I can forget. Lots and lots and lots of therapy.